I never thought my life would change in a single afternoon. One moment, I was just a 19-year-old girl trying to make sense of losing the only person who ever cared for me. The next, I was sitting in a lawyer's office as the words that would change everything were read out loud. To my beloved niece, Claire Whitmore, I leave my home on Lake Avalon and the entirety of my estate, valued at $3 million. The room went still. My parents, Daniel and Susan Whitmore, sat across from me, their bodies tense, their faces unreadable for a heartbeat. These were the same parents who had abandoned me when I was barely 12 years old, leaving me with nothing but the echo of a slammed door and years of unanswered questions. For 7 years, they were ghosts in my life. And now, here they were, sitting across from me at my great-aunt Eleanor's will reading, smiling as if they had every right to be there. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't look away from them. My father leaned back in his chair, a smug curve to his lips. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who could dominate a room just by folding his arms. My mother sat beside him, her manicured hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes glittering with the kind of satisfaction that sent a chill down my spine. Susan was the first to break the silence. She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Well, sweetheart, of course that means we'll be taking care of it for you. After all, we're your legal guardians." Her words hit me like ice water. Guardians. I almost laughed. For 7 years, Aunt Eleanor had been the one to tuck me in at night, to sit with me on the porch when I cried, to tell me that family was not about blood but about love. Where were Susan and Daniel then? Off chasing their own lives, too busy to remember they even had a daughter. And now, suddenly, they wanted to step back into the role of parents because there was a house on the lake and $3 million on the table. My father added with a voice dripping with false authority, "That's how these things work, Claire. What's yours is ours to manage. We'll make sure it's used wisely." I forced myself not to flinch. The words made me feel small again, like the little girl they had walked out on. But then I remembered something Aunt Eleanor used to tell me. She'd say, "Claire, the strongest people don't always shout. Sometimes they just smile and wait for the right moment to speak." So I smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to unsettle them. And when I did, their confidence flickered for just a second. The lawyer, a kindly man named Mr. Bennett, cleared his throat and shuffled his papers. But I hardly heard him. My focus was on Daniel and Susan. Their smiles had returned, though I could see the greed burning beneath them. They thought they had won. They thought I would roll over, let them control everything because I was just 19 and alone. But I wasn't alone. Not really. Because just then, the door to the office opened, and in walked Michael Harris. He was sharp in his dark suit, calm in a way that drew everyone's attention without him saying a word. Michael had been Eleanor's lawyer for years, but more importantly, he was someone I trusted. His presence was like a lifeline, a reminder that my parents didn't hold all the power they thought they did. Daniel's smirk faltered. Susan's hands tightened around her purse, and for the first time since I sat down in that office, I felt the balance shift. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady when I finally spoke. "Is that so?" I said to my parents, tilting my head slightly. "Then let's see what my lawyer thinks." The color drained from their faces, and in that moment, I knew the story was only just beginning. When people talk about home, they usually mean walls and furniture, a roof over their head. For me, home was never a place. It was a person, my great-aunt, Eleanor Whitmore. I still remember the day she opened her door to me. I was 12 years old, standing on her porch with a backpack that was too heavy for my shoulders and eyes that stung from crying. My parents had dropped me off after another one of their screaming matches, and this time, they didn't come back. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into years. Aunt Eleanor never once asked me when they'd return. She didn't need to. She just pulled me inside, hugged me tight, and said, "You're safe here, Claire. You always will be." That promise shaped my entire teenage life. Eleanor's lakefront house sat on the edge of Lake Avalon in northern Michigan, the kind of place that felt like it was pulled out of a postcard. The mornings smelled like pine and fresh water, and in the evenings the sun would set in shades of orange and gold across the lake. But it wasn't the beauty of the place that mattered to me. It was the way Eleanor made it feel alive. She had a lavender garden that lined the porch, and every summer she'd cut fresh bundles and tie them with twine for me to keep in my room. "So, you'll always sleep easy," she'd say with a smile. On winter nights, we'd curl up on the couch with hot cocoa while she told me stories about our family, stories that didn't make me feel abandoned but connected, like I came from something strong and resilient. Eleanor was in her late 60s when I moved in, but she had more energy than most people half her age. She volunteered at the library, ran the church bake sales, and never missed an opportunity to wave at every neighbor driving by. To me, she was more than an aunt. She was my anchor, my teacher, my mother when my own couldn't be. And though she never said it outright, I knew she carried anger toward Daniel and Susan, my parents. Whenever their names came up, her lips would tighten just slightly, her eyes would harden. Once when I was 15, I asked her why. They left. She sighed, brushed a strand of hair out of my face, and said, "Some people mistake selfishness for freedom, Claire. Your parents are two of them, but their choices don't define you." Those words stayed with me. They became the shield I carried through high school. I poured myself into books, part-time jobs, and small moments of joy. I worked evenings at the town's little bookstore, earning enough to feel some independence. And every night, no matter how tired I was, Eleanor was waiting for me at home with a plate of food and a light on in the window. Still, there was a part of me that longed for answers. Even when I pretended not to care, I wanted to know why my parents left me. I wanted to know if they ever thought of me, if they regretted anything. That tiny flicker of hope never fully went out, even though I hated myself for keeping it alive. Eleanor knew. She always knew. One evening, sitting on the porch swing as the crickets sang around us, she put her hand over mine and said, "You don't need their apologies to be whole, but if they ever come back, don't let them take what you've built. Promise me that." I nodded, not realizing at the time just how prophetic her words would be. By the time I turned 19, my life felt steady. I wasn't rich and I wasn't carefree, but I was safe. I was preparing for college, saving money, and planning to stay close to Lake Avalon because leaving the house felt unthinkable. That house wasn't just wood and brick. It was where I grew up. It was where Eleanor and I had created our world, our family. And then, without warning, the world shifted. When Eleanor passed away, it was like the air itself went out of the house. I remember walking into her bedroom after the funeral, staring at the empty chair by the window where she used to sit with her knitting. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't just grief, it was fear. For the first time since I was 12, I felt like I was standing on that porch again, waiting for someone to tell me I belonged. I thought I had no family left, no one to claim me. So when I sat in that lawyer's office days later, hearing that Eleanor had left me not only the house but $3 million, the shock nearly stole my breath. My heart raced, not with greed but with disbelief. She had given me everything. She had made sure I would never feel abandoned again. And then I turned my head and saw them. Daniel, Susan, the parents who had vanished from my life, smiling like vultures circling a feast. In that moment, I understood. Eleanor hadn't just left me an inheritance. She had left me a test, one final chance to prove I was strong enough to stand against the very people who once walked away. The room felt colder the moment my parents smiled. I sat in the polished leather chair of Mr. Bennett's office, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to appear calm while my heart thundered in my chest. Across from me, Daniel and Susan leaned forward, listening with the sudden attentiveness of people who hadn't cared about me for nearly a decade. The lawyer's voice echoed softly against the wood-paneled walls as he finished reading Eleanor's will. To my beloved niece, Claire Whitmore, I leave my home on Lake Avalon and the entirety of my estate, valued at $3 million. I trust she will use it to build the life she deserves. Silence followed. For a second, it was just me and the sound of my own breathing. $3 million, a lakefront house. It didn't feel real. Eleanor was gone, and yet her love reached me even here, even now. Then Susan broke the silence with a delicate little laugh. "Well," she said, her voice honeyed but sharp, "that's quite a responsibility for someone so young. Of course, Daniel and I will step in to make sure everything is managed properly." Her words clanged in my head like an alarm bell. Step in. Manage. She said it as though it were already decided, as if my aunt's final wishes were a formality and they were the real winners in the room. My father nodded firmly, his eyes fixed on me with a patronizing calm. "Claire, you're only 19. Legally, we're still your guardians. It makes sense that we take care of this on your behalf. You'll thank us later." Guardians. The word made bile rise in my throat. These were the same people who walked out of my life when I needed them most, who left me in Eleanor's care without a word. They hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't cared. But now, with millions of dollars at stake, they suddenly remembered their roles as mom and dad. I stared at them, searching their faces for even a flicker of guilt, of shame. But all I saw was greed. Daniel's jaw was set, his confidence unshakable. Susan smoothed a strand of hair behind her ear and gave me the kind of smile you'd give a child you thought you had under control. "I don't need you to take care of it," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Susan tilted her head, her expression a mix of pity and condescension. "Sweetheart, don't be silly. This isn't about what you need. It's about what's best for you. What's best for me?" The words came out sharper than I meant, but I couldn't stop. Where were you when Eleanor was raising me, when she was paying for my clothes, my food, my school? What was best for me then? Daniel's smile faltered, but only for a second. "That's the past," he said briskly. "We're here now. Let's not get emotional." Get emotional? As if my entire childhood abandonment was just a mood I could set aside. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burning with words I wasn't sure I should say. My instinct was to scream at them, to demand they leave. But another voice inside me whispered Eleanor's wisdom. Strength isn't about shouting. It's about knowing when to stay quiet and when to strike. So I swallowed my anger, forcing my features into calmness. "Of course," I said slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "If you say so." Their confidence returned instantly like a fire rekindled. They thought they had won. Daniel leaned back, satisfied. "Good girl. We'll make the necessary arrangements. Bennett, you'll send everything through us. Claire's too young to be dealing with the legal details." I glanced at Mr. Bennett, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat but didn't speak. He was loyal to Eleanor, but he was also cautious. And right now, the room was thick with tension. Inside, my emotions tangled in a storm. Part of me still craved their approval, a leftover wound that refused to heal. Another part of me burned with betrayal, screaming that I couldn't let them take what Eleanor had given me. I was 19, legally an adult. But their words planted doubt. Could they actually take this from me? Did the law still bind me to them? I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, staring into the dark water below, not knowing if I'd fall or if I'd learn to fly. That's when the door opened. The creak of the hinges cut through the tension, and all three of us turned. Michael Harris stepped inside, his presence quiet but commanding. He wasn't flashy, a simple dark suit, glasses, a leather folder tucked under his arm. But the way Daniel and Susan stiffened told me everything I needed to know. I didn't rise. I didn't need to. I just sat a little straighter and let my smile grow. "Is that so?" I said softly, turning my eyes back to my parents. "Then let's see what my lawyer thinks." The color drained from their faces. And for the first time, I felt the balance of power shift. The moment Michael Harris walked into the room, the air changed. He wasn't a tall man, not particularly intimidating in appearance, but there was a steadiness about him, a quiet authority that silenced every other noise in the room. His dark suit was crisp, his movements calm and deliberate as he set his leather folder down on the table. He glanced at me first, offering the smallest nod, the kind that said, "I'm here. You're not alone." My parents' reaction was instant. Daniel stiffened in his chair, shifting as though the leather had suddenly turned uncomfortable. Susan's hands, so perfectly folded a moment ago, tightened around her purse strap. They both recognized him. Michael had been Aunt Eleanor's attorney for years, handling her estate, her property, her will. More than that, he had been a constant figure in my life, too. Someone Eleanor trusted deeply and had introduced me to early on. He'd been there when she signed important documents, when she made arrangements for the house, even when she quietly joked, "If I keel over tomorrow, Michael knows what to do." Now, standing in that office, He looked at my parents with an expression that wasn't hostile, but wasn't friendly either. It was the look of a man who already knew the truth and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. I straightened in my chair, my earlier fear fading into something sharper. Determination. I thought of Eleanor's words. Strength isn't about shouting. It's about knowing when to strike. This was my moment. "So," I said, turning back to my parents, my voice calm, "you're saying you're my legal guardians, that what's mine belongs to you." Daniel gave a stiff nod, though his confidence wasn't as firm as before. "That's correct. Until you're capable of handling it responsibly, we'll manage it. It's for your own good." Michael pulled out a chair and sat down beside me, sliding his folder onto the table. "That's an interesting claim," he said smoothly, his tone measured, "but one I think we need to clarify before this conversation goes any further." Susan shot him a glare. "We're her parents. That's all the clarification needed." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but instead of exploding, I smiled, a small, controlled smile that I knew would unnerve them. "Funny," I said softly, "I don't remember you being there when I needed parents." Eleanor was. Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You don't understand the legalities, Claire. We do. We have rights." Michael raised a hand, cutting him off politely but firmly. "Actually, Daniel, that's where you're mistaken, and I'd suggest choosing your words carefully." He opened his folder and pulled out a stack of papers, each neatly organized and stamped. He didn't reveal them yet, but the sight alone was enough to rattle my parents. Their eyes flicked down nervously before returning to his face. In that moment, I realized something important. They weren't as sure of themselves as they pretended to be. Their confidence was a performance, and Michael had just interrupted the show. Inside, my fear began to morph into something stronger. Control. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to them. I was watching them react to me. "Claire," Susan said quickly, turning back to me, her voice taking on a syrupy sweetness. "Honey, don't let him confuse you. We're family. This is about trust. We can guide you, help you make the right choices." I tilted my head. "You mean the way you guided me when you left me with nothing? When you didn't bother to call on my birthdays? When you let Eleanor raise me while you disappeared?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. Michael's calm voice filled the silence. "Claire is 19. She is legally an adult. But more importantly, years ago, Eleanor took steps to ensure that no one could interfere with her care, her future, or her inheritance. That includes you." He tapped the folder lightly, the sound crisp and final. My parents flinched. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. My silence, my composure spoke louder than any angry outburst could. I watched their expressions. Daniel's jaw tightening, Susan's hands trembling slightly. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the abandoned little girl. I felt like Eleanor's heir, not just to her estate, but to her strength. This was the turning point. The moment I chose not to crumble, not to let them bulldoze me with their lies and intimidation. The moment I realized Eleanor hadn't just left me money or a house. She'd left me the tools to protect myself. As Michael prepared to reveal the documents, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself one final thought. You walked out on me once. This time, I'm walking away from you. The silence in Mr. Bennett's office stretched like a rubber band about to snap. My parents sat rigid, their faces pale but still holding on to that thin veneer of control. Michael adjusted his glasses, unfolded the top document from his leather folder, and laid it carefully on the polished table. "This," he began calmly, "is the official termination of parental rights filed over 7 years ago by Eleanor Whitmore on behalf of Claire." Daniel's head jerked toward him. "Termination of what?" "Of your guardianship," Michael replied, his tone steady, professional, almost surgical in its precision. "When you abandoned Claire, Eleanor went through the courts. She became her legal guardian, and as of Claire's 18th birthday, she became an adult in the eyes of the law. You have no claim, not to her and certainly not to her inheritance." The words hit the air like a hammer. Susan's face drained of color. She leaned forward, her voice a desperate whisper. "That's not possible. We were never notified. There must be a mistake. Michael shook his head and tapped the court seal at the bottom of the page. No mistake. The state declared you unfit. Legally, you ceased being her parents the moment the paperwork was finalized. Daniel's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening against the arm of his chair. You can't just erase blood. She's our daughter. Finally, I spoke, my voice sharper than I intended, but steady with years of pent-up anger. Number you gave up being my parents the day you left. Eleanor was my family. She showed up. You didn't. Susan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument she could have offered. Michael slid another paper forward. And just so we're clear, Eleanor anticipated you might attempt something like this. That's why she left explicit instructions. Her estate is solely in Claire's name, protected from outside interference. If either of you attempt to challenge it, the case will reopen all documentation of your abandonment, and I assure you, it will not reflect kindly on you. That was it. The rubber band snapped. Susan's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, clutching it like it was a lifeline. We just wanted what was best for her, she muttered, but even she didn't sound convinced. Daniel slammed a hand on the table, but the sound wasn't intimidating anymore. It was hollow, desperate. His eyes flicked between me and Michael, searching for some opening, some shred of control to cling to. He found none. I leaned forward, finally meeting his glare head-on. You had your chance to do what was best for me. You walked away. You don't get to come back now because there's money involved. The words tasted like fire on my tongue, but they didn't burn. They freed me. Susan stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Come on, Daniel, she snapped, her voice tight with frustration. This is pointless. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared at me, his expression caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. Then without a word, he pushed back his chair and followed her out of the office. The door slammed behind them, leaving only silence and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath the entire time. My hands trembled, not with fear anymore, but with release. For years, I had replayed their abandonment in my mind, wondering if it was my fault, wondering if I wasn't enough. But now, sitting in that room with the proof in black and white, I knew the truth. They had lost me long before Eleanor took me in, and I had gained something far greater than their presence. I had gained freedom. Michael turned to me, his voice softer now. Eleanor was a wise woman. She made sure you'd be protected. You don't have to be afraid of them anymore. Tears burned in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep, a smile Eleanor would have recognized. She always knew, I whispered. She always knew this day would come. For the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. Not because of the house or the money, but because I had faced the very people who had haunted me for years and walked away stronger. That was the moment I realized the inheritance wasn't just property or wealth. It was Eleanor's final gift, the power to stand on my own, unshaken, no matter who tried to break me. The office felt unbearably quiet after my parents left. The slam of the door still echoed in my ears, but the air was lighter, as if a weight I'd carried for years had finally been lifted. I sat there, frozen for a moment, my fingers tracing the grain of the polished wooden table. My whole life I had dreamed of hearing my parents say they wanted me, that they cared. But when they finally showed up, I realized they weren't here for me at all. They were here for what I had, and that truth, as painful as it was, set me free. Michael gathered his papers calmly as though he had just completed any other business transaction. He looked at me and gave a nod that was both professional and personal, the kind of gesture that said, "You did well. You're stronger than you know." Eleanor wanted this for you, he said gently. Not just the house, not just the money. She wanted you to know you could stand on your own, that you didn't need anyone else's permission to live your life. I swallowed hard, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. For years, I had wondered if I was enough. My parents' absence had left a hole in me, one I thought could never be filled. But sitting there, with Michael's words settling in and the knowledge that Eleanor had fought so hard to protect me, I realized the hole wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with her love, her wisdom, and the strength she had left behind. When I finally walked out of that office, the late afternoon sun hit me like a warm embrace. The world looked different, sharper, clearer, as though I'd stepped into a life that had always been waiting for me. The drive back to the lakefront house was quiet, just the hum of the car and the steady beat of my heart. As I pulled into the driveway, I looked at the house, its white porch wrapped with lavender bushes that Eleanor had planted years ago. It no longer felt like just her house. It was mine now, not just by law, but by love and by legacy. That night, I sat on the porch swing where Eleanor and I used to talk. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, calm and endless. I closed my eyes and imagined her voice, steady and kind. Family isn't blood, Claire. Family is who shows up. She had been right all along. My parents didn't show up for me, not when it mattered. They had walked away, and in doing so, they had written themselves out of my story. But Eleanor had shown up every single day. She had given me not just shelter, not just comfort, but a sense of worth I could never have found on my own. And now, even in death, she was still showing up. Through the house, through the inheritance, through the strength she had made sure I carried with me. As I sat there, the lesson became clear. The inheritance wasn't about money or property. It was about freedom. It was about choice. It was about finally being able to close the door on the people who had abandoned me and step into a life where I defined what family meant. I knew people might look at me and say I was lucky. Lucky to have a house, lucky to have money, lucky to have escaped the clutches of parents who didn't care. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt prepared. Eleanor had prepared me for this. Every story she told, every piece of advice she gave, every moment she held my hand when I felt small. This was her final lesson, that I was enough, that I didn't need saving. As the night deepened, I whispered a promise into the cool air, my eyes on the water. I'll protect this, Aunt Eleanor, the house, the garden, everything you loved. But more than that, I'll protect myself. I'll live the life you wanted me to. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had lived in me since the day my parents left was gone. In its place was something new, peace. The next morning, as the sun rose over Lake Avalon, I brewed coffee in Eleanor's old kitchen and sat by the window. The house creaked with familiar sounds, the lavender swayed outside in the breeze, and I realized this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning. Because that day in the lawyer's office, I hadn't just inherited money or property. I had inherited my independence, my strength, my freedom. And that, more than anything else, was priceless. And that's how I realized my great-aunt didn't just leave me a house or money. She left me freedom and the strength to write my own story. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that family isn't always about blood, but about love. And of course, if you want more powerful stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the family we choose is the one that saves us.